Hi there and welcome back. Now, some lenses are just iconic and I've been wanting to try this one for a very long time. It is of course the Nikon 200-400 f4 VR2. Now I tested the Z100-400 last week, I'm sure you remember that. And the question is, will I be able to resist comparing them? Well, I very much doubt it, do you? And straight off, unlike last week, the first thing you think of when you pick this up is, holy cow, it's heavy. Where's the tripod? In truth, you can handhold it, just not for very long. And I suggest that you become a regular at the local gym or in fact some kind of weight training regime commencing at a minimum of 3 months before you need to use it. In fact, you could use this for the weight training, in fact. Okay, I've overdone the weight a little bit. It's not that bad. It's actually 3,570 grams. That's still 500 grams more than my lumpy VR2. Now, the odd thing is it's actually 620 grams heavier than the Z400 to f2.8, but I guess it's got more glassing because it does more. Then again, the f2.8 does also have that wonderful teleconverter part of it. Anyway, nonetheless, this is a lot heavier. Now, at this stage, I would normally go through the buttons and switches in a more detailed way, but to be honest with you, it's pretty much the same as all the other Nikon zooms. So here's a quick run through. First of all, let's get the 3 confusing autofocus settings out the way. You've got M-A, MA, which is autofocus with manual override, and then you've got M, which is manual focus, and an AM setting, which means, to quote Nikon, autofocus can be overridden by manually focusing with the focus ring, but focus ring detection sensitivity is lower in MA mode. Use this mode to avoid cancelling the AF setting by unintentionally moving the focus ring, which is here. Yeah, clear as mud, eh? I would suggest you just you try and avoid turning this when you hold the lens, because there's enough of it not to need to. Anyway, nonetheless, you've also got AF distance, full or limited to 6 meters and more. You've obviously got your VR on off and normal and active. And you've got the 4 buttons that activate the memory recall. Talking of that, you've got the switches back here for memory recall. You've got focus lock and AF on. And you've also got your memory recall beeping sound when it's activated or saved. My suggestion is you switch that off, otherwise you irritate everyone around you and scare all the nature away. Anyway, nonetheless, over this side, oh dear, you've got the memory set button just there. You've got your 52mm filter holder, which is here. Okay, and obviously the zoom ring here. But the most important thing is, how does it perform? Well, I went to Richmond Park in London yesterday to try it out, so let's take a look at what happened. We spotted some deer as we drove in, found a car park and walked back to photograph them. As you can see, I was using a monopod and we are maintaining a respectful distance away from the herd. The focusing seemed quick, but the eye tracking wasn't really engaging like the Z100-400 had. But a little more of that later. Talking of that last video, Iron Man Tooltime made a fantastic comment about f5.6 not being enough to blur the background. With that in mind, did I get away with the 200-400's f4? You see, the very nature of Richmond Park means that the background can be a little cluttered and close behind the subject, so you need all the help you can get. But I think the lens worked well in that aspect. Would I have liked f2.8? Maybe. And I desperately wanted to compare the lens to my 300mm VR2 for that very reason. But due to road closures, we ended up walking much further than we intended. That meant that I had to sacrifice weight, and so very reluctantly I left the 300mm back at the car. There are some shoots that are destined not to go as planned. I really wanted to see the difference between the Z100-400 and the 300mm VR2, so we left the park and headed out to get some birds in flight. But before we get to that, you know my love of camera history and statistics. Well, I find it fascinating, that Nikon have been producing 200-400 zoom lenses since 1984. To put that into perspective, that was the same year that Prince Harry was born, Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan had just started their special relationship, and if you were in luck, you were driving around Britain in an original Volkswagen GTI. If you worked in an office, you were introduced to the floppy disk, and in our spare time we were wowed by the very first Terminator film. I was actually dreaming about owning an F3 with a motor drive whilst polishing my shiny new FM2. So I think it's safe to say that Nikon have been kicking out the 200-400 lens for quite a while now. The version that I'm testing is actually a lot newer. It came out in the same year as the first iPad. It followed a very popular predecessor, the first VR, and there isn't a huge amount of difference between them. You get an upgraded VR system claiming 4 stops instead of the original 2, nano crystal coating to stop flare, and that flipping new M-A focus mode which ignores slight motion of the focus ring. Not huge advances then really. Apart from the VR2 maybe? Anyway, now given the used price difference, the 2003 VR can be bought from around £1,089 used obviously, and the VR2 is £1,759, it's got to be worth trying either one of them, hasn't it? Anyway, back to the test. Now bearing in mind that the version I was testing was released, as I said, in 2010, is it kind of unfair of me to compare it to the 12-month-old Z100-400? Nah. Don't forget that I'm also comparing it to the 300mm VR2 as well. And that lens is actually a year older than the 200-400. So all's fair really, isn't it? Anyway, I was really looking forward to seeing how this 200-400 lens dealt with birds in flight. Mainly because I'd heard great things about it. I apologise for the jerky footage, as I prefer to do this type of photography without the monopod. All of these clips are slowed down by 50% so you can see the focus working. It all happens rather quickly in real time, even with these birds. We started with a bald eagle and went on to a snowy owl. As you can see, the lens worked pretty well, bearing in mind that it's an F mount. So I've attached it to the Z9, obviously with an FTZ adapter. Will this slow down the focus? Well, I previously mounted it to a D5 and there was no discernible difference, especially when you consider the advanced focus system of the Z9. After the owl disappeared behind the mound, the focus manages to pick it up fairly quickly, once I'd found it anyway. Now in theory, the great thing about birds in flight is that I have a catalogue of images to compare this lens to. So finding images from the 300 VR2 and the Z100-400 shouldn't have been a problem. So if you look closely at these three images, it's pretty hard to pick up the best. All three are sharp and each one has its merits. Don't forget that each of these images were taken on a different day in different weather. Ah, see the problem? Yeah. With this test anyway, it's all about focus on sharpness. In this set, it's between the F-mounted lenses. Look at the eyes in the close-up of the eagle and the vulture. They are pin sharp. The Z lens is very slightly soft, but it's marginal. Yes, I know one of these isn't a snowy owl. The Hawk Conservancy that I go to rotates the birds they fly, so I don't have a comparison with the 300mm. It makes no difference to the quality of the shot anyway. The Z lens does a very good job, but so does the 300mm. I really wish I'd done this with the Z100-400 lens, because I would suspect that it would have been as sharp as the other two. I think that the 300 has slightly more detail on the feathers, but it's absolutely negligible. I'll tell you what, you don't get much sharper than this, do you? Finally, we have the cranes coming into land. The Z lens is far better than the other two, but this is one of those times when ISO noise could have muddied the water. Maybe I over-edited it. I don't normally edit them, do I? Anyway, the 300 is a little soft, but not bad. And I guess you're all wondering what the 300mm VR2 would have been like with a 1.4 teleconverter. Well, I did anyway. Well, I'll tell you what, it's just like this. The focus seems to pick up the birds better with this setup than with the 200-400, and hopefully that would give me more in-focus images to choose from. I tend to use the wide area AF large focus mode for birds in flight and of course animal eye tracking. Even with the FTZ adapter and teleconverter extending the length of the lens, the 300, though fairly front heavy now, is handling relatively well. It actually feels a lot easier to track the birds with this set than with the 200-400, but it's still not as sprightly as the light 100-400. That made the operation almost painless. The focus here is on the reeds as they're a lot closer than the bird is, but as soon as the focus snaps on it, it only lets go momentarily, though the eye tracking was struggling a little on this occasion. So the 1.4 teleconverter doesn't make any difference to the focus speed. What about the quality of the images? I'm only showing a few of the randomly chosen ones here. I could have put up a lot more of them. It seemed to be that compatible. So the bottom line is all three are pretty good lenses. The 200-400 needs a lot more work and technique to get the same results than the others, but it's still a really good lens, and it's handy to have the 200-400 zoom option, especially if you have a 70-200 already in the bag. It may be heavy, but it's reassuringly solid, and the f4 you get at 400mm produces enough bokeh for those who prefer their background blurred. The Z100-400 won't give you those backgrounds, as you'll largely find yourself limited to 5.6, but it's much lighter, and it has ultra flexible focal length. And if you're worried about sharpness, don't. It can really mix it with the big boys at a fraction of the price. My 300 is probably the most consistent, and the f2.8 means much more low-light versatility. And it also means that those stunningly blurred backgrounds are almost guaranteed. Couple that with the bonus of zero difference in quality and focusability when you fit the 1.4 teleconverter to this lens, and it seems to tick all those boxes. But don't forget, you do lose your f2.8 advantage when you use a converter, though you still get f4 if you stick to a 1.4. Now, if you've reached a conclusion about which lens you think is best, then what happens when I throw in some images from the Z400 f2.8 that I tested a few months ago? If you remember, I asked what the eye-watering £14,000 price tag got you. Well, just take a look. It's food for thought, isn't it? Anyway, right, I'm off for a well-needed haircut, and then I'm away next week at Crufts. So I'll see you all when I get back. In the meantime, if you enjoyed this video, then please like it, and if you really liked it and you haven't yet subscribed, then hit that link below. Thank you so much to my current subscribers. You keep me going, guys. Until next time, bye.